Sawadee welcome to this special show. Now, one of the main reasons behind the ousting of the Thaksin administration back on September 19 last year was corruption, the various corruption issues that showed up in his administration. And one of the major groups that has been unveiling the various corruption within the previous administration, of course, is the Democrat Party, which was the major opposition party during the time that Thaksin Shinawatra was in office. Now, I'm very honored to have with me today Kun Aphisit Wechachiwa, leader of the Democrat Party. Sawadee ka, Kun Aphisit. Thank you for joining us on the show. Now, your party recently unveiled a book, this book, the Menu Corruption book, Menu Corruption Rabab Thaksin, the Thaksin System Menu Corruption book. Now, what brought about the publication of this book, sir?
Well, if you look at the authors of the various articles or chapters in the book, most of them were former MPs, and they had been doing a lot of work in terms of investigating the various corruption issues, as well as actually taking these issues up to parliamentary debates, to certain agencies to deal with the problems. So we have a number of cases that we have been working on. Some go maybe as far back as 5-6 years, and it's certainly odd to us that only after the coup that many of these issues or many of these scandals surfaced, and we were very surprised that so many people were unaware that these were issues that had been debated before, that had been brought to the surface before by a number of people, including members of the Democrat Party. And we thought that since corruption is not only one reason why people were dissatisfied with the Thaksin government, but it's also a problem that has really plagued our political system for so long, that it would be a good idea to have a document that would set for the record all these scandal cases, all these corruption cases, with a view to helping people, everybody concerned, to think about how best to prevent these kinds of problems happening again.
Now, as you said, it's very true that Thai politics has always been plagued with corruption, but we see a new form of corruption with the Thaksin administration, what is called policy-based corruption. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, I think corruption, like so many other phenomena, has its own development and evolution. Not just over the Thaksin years, but even before that, we begin to see more sophisticated forms of corruption. If you look back in the old days, you think of corruption, you think of some government officials.
Yes,
basically just taking some money. Basically taking some money, say, from the budget. Instead of spending 100 baht, they would maybe spend 80, 85, 90 baht and pocket the difference. That's a very sort of old form of corruption that very easily understood. It hasn't gone away. It's still with us.
Yes.
But then, as the economy became more complex, and as the private sector got more involved in government work, we begin to see a different form of corruption. So now we're talking about commission when you're trying to when you auction something, or when some public works go up to open to competition for bidding, you begin to see commission, you begin to see collusion. Collusion maybe at first was really the work between the private operators themselves, but became more systematic, so that even the government agency itself was helping to coordinate the collusion. Again, that's a more complicated form of corruption that took place. But with the Thaksin years, I think it's raised to another level still. We now have not just corruption which is a result of the work between the public and the private sector and maybe the bureaucrats, but now we've got private sector players entering government themselves. So you now begin to have people who wear two hats. They are still business owners, they have clear business interests, but they are now also policymakers, which is of course what we call conflict of interest.
Yes.
But they get around the technical legal definition of conflict of interest by perhaps having nominees, members of the family, to own the business or to own the shares. But once they're in power, once they're the policy makers, now policy decisions are made not with a view to serving the public interest, but first and foremost with their own business interests in mind. So we now have a much more integrated system of corruption in place, where even at the stage of policy design, you had people who were working to further their own business interests and using their discretionary power as policymakers to design policies in such a way not to best serve the public interest, but to somehow further their own business interests.
I see. That's really true. I read through this book and a lot of different policies, a lot of corruption issues, and I was amazed at how they came up with all these ways of skimming money from the government. Now, looking back then, we had the 1997 Constitution in place, and that Constitution was seen by many as one of the best constitutions that Thailand has. We had safety measures to do away with such actions of corruption, but it failed ultimately with the Thaksin administration. So, in your opinion, what went wrong with that constitution?
Well, you're absolutely right that when we had the Constitution of 1997, we had high expectations, and we thought that having quite a sophisticated network of organizations that would deal with abuse of power, that somehow we can overcome this problem. So we had the Constitutional Court, we had the Electoral Commission, we have the National Counter-Corruption Commission, and the list goes on.
The various independent agencies.
And in truth, one must say that when the Constitution came into effect in the early years, things were looking good. I was part of the Chuan administration.
Yes.
There was corruption during those years, but the difference was we allowed the organizations to get on with their work. So eventually, with the drug purchase scandal in the Public Health Ministry, eventually the minister was sentenced to jail.
Yes.
You had the Secretary General of the Democrat Party, very powerful man, who had who was ruled by the Constitutional Court to have falsely declared his assets. And so everybody played by the rules, and people had high expectations. Even with the Electoral Commission, when the first round of Senate elections were held, we had a number of prominent politicians disqualified or actually having to go through reruns of elections. But then I guess corruption finds its way.
Corruption evolved faster than we thought.
And what happened effectively was the corruption of the Constitution and the constitutional bodies. And I think that the first, I would say, the landmark case was the Constitutional Court ruling on the asset concealment of Kun Thaksin. So that was his first year in office. That was when we began to see that the expectations that we had of the Constitution, that you will enforce the law no matter what, that somehow that didn't happen. Somehow Thaksin managed to whip up public sentiment that the Constitutional Court had to take into account the political environment, the political sentiment, and I think if you actually read the official ruling of individual judges, you will find that some of them had real difficulties in terms of legal justification for their opinions.
In trying to make what people see as wrong seem right.
Yes.
in
That's
the
right.
legal
And even the
process.
people sort of accepted that he was wrong, but somehow felt that, well, he should be given a chance
Sort
to
of
govern the country.
it wasn't his intention to commit wrongdoing.
Or whatever. but I think that was the landmark case. And then standards began to slip. And then I think Thaksin saw clearly that if he was going to survive future scandals, especially if he or his government would be involved in corrupt practices, then it was absolutely vital to have all these institutions, organizations under control. So then we begin to see a very systematic corruption of these mechanisms, right from the selection process into the details of the working on the various cases. And then on top of that, of course, he began the tight control of the media.
Yes.
So that various scandals would not be exposed, or if they were, would only receive fairly small amount of space in the media, so that during the early Thaksin years, very few people were able to take on those in power in terms of exposing what they'd done wrong and actually following things up, with continuous broadcast or presentation of what was going on. So I guess 3-4 years into the Thaksin administration, mention of corrupt cases was sort of made in passing. People like myself have about one occasion a year, which is a no confidence motion,
yes.
to get some kind of space in the media for what we want to say. But even with those cases, it was extremely difficult to follow up.
Okay.
I look at the work of the current regime in dealing with the corruption cases, and I mean they are the same cases that we had presented 4 years ago,
exactly.
5 years ago,
yes.
And yet at the time there was no mechanism to follow things up. And to be fair, even the public didn't care so much about what was going on. Thaksin was very successful in putting these ideas into people that, well, all governments are corrupt, all politicians are corrupt. At least he was working for the people, he was working for the poor, he was delivering the goods for the country, and so on. And so people were willing to take a blind eye, forgive or forget, until of course things got so bad to a critical level.
Yes.
I guess the last year of his tenure.
Yes. Now that brought about to my next question about the corruption investigation that is going on right now. So is that the reason why it's proceeding so slowly? You think the sentiment of the people that they still don't quite understand what went wrong with the
No, not anymore. Not anymore. I think public sentiment turned quite sharply during the last year and a bit. I think ever since some people took to the streets, and it became clear that the lack of moral or ethical standards among politicians was actually costing the country quite a lot. I think the public sentiment has changed. But what's been difficult for the people investigating these cases now, of course, is that because the corruption is so systematic, so you had not just politicians, but a long line of bureaucrats, plus all the big private sector players involved. It's not going to be easy to get cooperation. We had this trouble earlier on about various government agencies refusing to step forward.
Yes. And filing a complaint. And that is due to the fact that so many people in those agencies have been involved. So it's difficult for them to step forward because they don't know what will happen to their people. Now we have a period of a few months left according to the schedule that the Council for National Security wrote out for investigation into corruption for them to remain in power for an election to be held. So do you think all these cases could be wrapped up? I mean, we've seen...
I don't think we can expect all cases to reach its conclusion. Certainly not at the court level. So you can't expect the courts to make a final judgment by the end of this year. Certainly not all cases. In fact, we'd be lucky to have a few cases reach that stage. But what's important for the committee is for them to finish their own work, get the prosecution process going in cases of wrongdoing.
So do you think their term, there has been a proposal that their term they be given additional time to remain in power and to finish these corruption
I think to the
investigations?
extent that there may have to be some kind of transitional arrangement, that might be necessary. But we don't know. They may speed things up over the next few months. They may have done the difficult part and may now find it easier to move ahead. So we cannot say for sure. And ideally, of course, once we've got the new constitution, once elections are held, we want the normal mechanisms to take up this work. But the transfer of these cases from the current regime to the normal mechanisms will have to take place under certain guidance or rule. And I think if the proposal about extending term makes any sense, it's this particular bit of having a smooth transitional arrangement.
I see. Now, one question that I have to ask you, with the various corruption issues in Thailand that goes on, the people who are prosecuted are often government officials, state officials, or people in the lower ranking level, and you really can't find evidence to implicate ministers, for example, or high-ranking politicians. So in these cases, you've seen a lot of the documents and evidence in the various corruption deals. Do you think there is enough to implicate some of the ministers in the previous administration?
Well, it depends from case to case. And it is why in the 97 Constitution, I think the drafters were quite careful to write provisions with this idea in mind, that these kinds of crimes, if you like, committed by politicians are not going to have the same kind of evidence, are not just have the same kind of...
You don't need to see their signature on
exactly
contracts or things like that.
You'd be very hard pushed to find any minister signing their names on something which will implicate them for wrongdoing. But you have to take the circumstantial evidence and the process, like even the courts dealing with these cases are special. That's why you've got a special department in the Supreme Court to deal with the cases of corrupt politicians. So if you understand the principle of that, I think it shouldn't be too difficult, certainly not impossible, to get some people prosecuted and actually eventually punished. After all, we've seen 3-4 cases where the Supreme Court has ruled against politicians.
Okay, now we'll take a short break right now, Kun Apisit, and when we come back, we'll talk more about the new charter that is being drafted by the Constitution Drafting Committee, so stay tuned for that.